Hello, everyone. It's me again. Time for another ramble. I'm going to start by saying to the 10 or so people that have already asked me if they could use some of my footage from Ron Paul and from Rick Santorum. Yes, go right ahead. I'm not going to get pissed if you have a problem with a candidate that I have filmed and you want to rebut some of the arguments that they made. I was talking with Brian J. 1962 just this morning about something that Rick Santorum said regarding the high cost of medical care and medicine in America, and how Rick Santorum characterized it that America was the only country doing a lot of medical research and coming up with new advances in science. So that's why we need to be paying all this money to drug companies, because without it there would be no more innovation. So yeah, he had a problem with that because he lives in the UK and he knows the UK's budget for research, and he knows other countries that have budgeted for research. So, yeah, it's not the only avenue to advancement to have Americans pay out the ass and have Canadians pay far less, or to even charge different amounts in different countries for the same drug that's being produced. So yeah, if you want to pwn that, go ahead. If you want to argue against what he said or what Ron Paul said in his speeches, go ahead. Rick Santorum said a lot of things that are a lot more weird in both videos that I took of him. He talked about a lot of the same things, and to see the different ways that he brought things up, but then said similar things, it's a good compare and contrast. I'm really glad that he didn't say the same exact heartfelt things about his kid. He's got a toddler with trisomy 18, and that toddler was in the hospital recently. And if I had heard the same speech twice, I would have felt like he was being less genuine. And that didn't happen. But when I saw when it came up the second time, because I filmed two of his speeches, I was really just like bracing myself for him to say the exact same thing, that his child can do one thing and well, and that's to love. I really didn't want to hear that twice. So I'm glad he didn't say it twice. But also, Rick Santorum, in both speeches, denied global warming, or man made global warming. And I know a lot of you probably want to touch on that, one in particular that I just got a message from. So, if you want to rebut his claims that man made global warming has been a fabrication by the left to push their agenda, go right ahead. I don't care. From the Ron Paul video, while I was filming it, I didn't actually re-watch it. I just slapped the top and tail title and fade out on that speech. But while I was there, it struck me that when he said that the U.S. Was assassinating people, that maybe I should look into it. You know, see exactly what he's talking about, that we have assassination squads. So, yeah. Just because I film these candidates during the caucus week here when they're all coming to my town doesn't mean that I'm actually endorsing any of them. And I have very big differences with all of the candidates, even Obama. So, before you jump to conclusions and think that I am endorsing a candidate just because I write them up in an article, I think you should wait until after this week in particular is over, because I just filmed Rick Santorum and Ron Paul, and on Saturday I'm going to be filming Mitt Romney. I don't know if I'll get Newt Gingrich because he is in Las Vegas right now, and it seems like he's concentrating on Nevada because they're having their primary on February 4th, and the Colorado caucus is on February 7th. So maybe in the 5th or the 6th or the 7th, I'll be able to film Newt Gingrich if he were to make a surprise trip through the state. I don't know. Maybe he's given up on Colorado. I do know that a lot of people are supporting him, though. But, let's see. Yeah. So, for the rest of this ramble, first I'm going to talk about what I just went to today, because I didn't get to film what I saw today. It was in a courtroom in the El Paso County Courthouse. I believe it was room S503, and I believe it was Judge Schultz. I might be mispronouncing that. I didn't snap a picture because I basically don't even whip out my cell phone in that building, because they're really sticklers about recording anything. So I have no recordings, but it was a motions hearing for Bob Kraus. Some of you have been following along with his case with me. He had a motions hearing last week, but now he had a motions hearing this week, and both motions he pretty much lost. So both motions, I think, were valid complaints on the part of the defense, and both were denied. And I think, I don't know how many times they can submit motions before the case actually goes to trial, but I think they might go back to the drawing board and resubmit these motions. The first one was about Miranda rights, because Bob Kraus was not read any rights at all when he was having his marijuana plant seized, even though the detectives talked with him. And it's this weird rule that they can come in, serve a search warrant, seize all the plants that someone has, and talk with them while they're doing it, and tell them, "Oh, you're free to go whenever you want. We'll search and seize in your house while you're gone." And then of course people want to stay there because they want to watch and see if their shit gets rifled through. So Bob, he was talking with them and feeling very intimidated, and they kept on asking him questions. And of course, when you have armed men in your house, and they're searching your house, you don't really feel like you can leave. It's like, oh yeah, you can leave, but it's not in your best interests because you'll be leaving your house unguarded with people who want to seize all your shit. So, yeah, the way that the first motion went about he didn't get Mirandized at all, and he didn't have to be because the judge ruled that he was not in custody because the all it takes is for the police to say you're free to go at any time. We're just going to serve this search warrant in your house and forcibly come in. So, and then when one of the detectives says, "Oh, you want to talk to one of our detectives about this?" and he says yes, all of that shit is admissible in court without them having to Mirandize him because they didn't charge him at the time. They took all of his shit, talked to him while they did it, and then on a later date, they charged him with a crime. So all of that shit is admissible because they didn't arrest him. Even though, you know, I just the way that the judge followed the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law in that instance. I guess some people would respect him for not legislating from the bench and creating a precedent, but I don't know. If I had 7 police officers in my house and they wanted to talk to me, I would kind of feel like, you know, there was an imposition to the point where maybe Miranda rights should be read, because now the talking that they did during that seizure is going to be used against him in his trial. You know, and I think any time that a policeman is going to be saying something to you that could be used against you in a trial, when it's obvious that you are collecting evidence for a fucking trial, I think that they should Mirandize people that they are talking to, that are going to be the defendant, the obvious defendant. So, yeah, that was a miscarriage of justice, one of the counts. And then the second count, more of the same. What happened was they seized 55 plants, allegedly. They seized 55 plants, stuck them in burlap sacks, and they took them to the evidence room, and they've been sitting there rotting for, you know, months now, since May 5th, 2011. So, the defense lawyer argued that the way that the plants were being stored was such that they would be dehydrated and brown and dry and curl up and tangle with each other, and they could not get an accurate count of how many plants were in there, and they could not test each plant to see if it actually was marijuana. Now, some of you are like probably thinking, well, that's just a bullshit defense ploy because of course it's marijuana. They know what marijuana looks like. No, because there are actually different strains of hemp, and in many cases, in one in particular with SoCo MMJ, they were trying to count some kind of purple something else plant as a marijuana plant, and it wasn't even marijuana. So yeah, this is important, but also if they can't prove that it's marijuana, then why should they be able to charge people with it? You know, and it could be oregano. You know, it could be parsley. It could be whatever. In the state that it is now, you wouldn't know what it is because they didn't preserve it well. That 55 plants, and they had 4 sacks. And I believe one sack had one plant in it, one sack had 7, one sack had 20, and the other sack had the rest, all crammed into one bag. One burlap sack that was then labeled with how many plants were supposed to be in there. When they took the plants, they didn't take the root bulb. They cut the plants at the stalk. So you can't associate the plant with the root bulb because the root bulb isn't there. So you can't really count the root bulbs and say, well, that's how many plants there are. You know? And who's to say they didn't cut at the base of a plant and cut branches of the plant off and then count them as a separate plant and raise the number of plants that they counted. So, yeah, it was just fucking messed up. The defense was allowed to see the evidence, but they were not allowed to take the plants out of the bags to count them for themselves because the evidence department knows that labs that test things for marijuana will not test a bag that has been opened because the police could have opened and broken the seal and they could have added more plants to it or added marijuana to plants that were not exactly marijuana. So they weren't allowed to go in and try to pull plants apart and see how many say stems that they could have told were okay, this is the stalk of a individual plant. Even then, how would, if all of the leaves have basically been in these sacks, dried and fallen off of all the plants, how would you know which leaf was associated with which stalk? They could have all come from, a minority of the stalks in there, and if they're testing each leaf to see if it's marijuana, how can you say this marijuana leaf belonged to this stalk, which was one plant? You can't when they're in a sack and they're all mixing together that dried vegetable stuff. So the judge ruled that the defense did not meet its burden of proof that the evidence was being destroyed. The exculpable evidence was, possibly still there. So maybe the defense will be able to submit another motion and prove, by going down to the evidence room and attempting again to ascertain exactly how many plants are in a bag, and if the evidence room won't allow them to inspect the contents of the bag to see how many plants are in it and how they could match one leaf that might be loose in there to what plant it came from. If they're not allowed to look at the evidence, then if they're denied again, then they can represent it to the judge and say, well, this is very pertinent information to the case and we can't get it because they did not use proper procedures in cataloging what they seized from his home. And they talked about, why didn't you use a separate bag for each plant? And, in a case where there's thousands of plants, of course, that would start to get redundant. But this was a case with 55, And they could have bagged each and every one and took a clipping from each one, and then labeled them which clipping came from which plant, and then tested that. But they did not. The police department is actually only required if they find a room, a grow room, they label that grow room some police label, and every plant they take in there, in that room, can be randomly sampled with as little as one clipping from one plant, and then they can declare all the other plants marijuana. And this is standard practice. So, this should not be standard practice. They should have to clip from every plant that is being considered marijuana, and they should have to test every single one if they're going to use that as another count against an offender, But they don't. And so, yeah, the judge made his ruling, and then it was about a minute after he made his ruling that it came out that some labs will not test for marijuana on vegetable matter if the evidence bag is opened. Well, they can't count how many plants are in there for themselves as the defense if they're not allowed to open the bag, and if they send it off to the lab without opening it, they don't know how many plants are in there, and then that adds another level of, well, it could have been tampered with, So yeah, the police destroyed evidence by putting it all in the same bags, using 4 burlap sacks for 55 allegedly plants. So, I rode down to the courthouse with Haas, and right towards the end, when it was clear that both motions were being denied, and the irony that the judge had the information in front of him that, there was a problem with the defense trying to get certain information and being denied it because the evidence room wasn't allowing them to do stuff, and the prosecution was saying that the labs won't test it if they are allowed to look at it, and so they're getting denied there. And then the judge is saying, well, you haven't met your burden of proof that the exculpable evidence has been destroyed. Well, that is the evidence they're trying to get, and they're being denied it because the police fucked up. They met their burden of proof, and the judge saw it right in front of him. And the irony of this was such that Haas had to bolt out of the courtroom. And it didn't make that big of a scene. It did make the judge and everyone turn towards the door. But, yeah. Afterwards, one of Bob's lawyers, I talked with him outside, and he thanked us for coming out in support of him again. But I had to tell him, dude, you did a good job. It was just, the irony that was in front of that judge. I'm like, you just have a judge that's brain farting. That's all, because this is the kind of shit that creates appeals. It creates the opportunity to appeal shit when the judge obviously misses things that are right in front of him. That have been presented to him, and he still just does not get it. So, yeah. The last thing I wanted to talk about was, let's see, as a person who went to many Occupy protests, I saw a lot of Ron Paul stuff. And I now have an opportunity to check out the entire Ron Paul platform, because going to Ron Paul's speech 2 days ago, I went and picked up all of his flyers. Now, I found far less that I am at odds with his speech than in these flyers. So I think what I want to do is do another Ramble video where I'm going to talk about some of these flyers and probably read them to the camera. But each flyer here that I have out of this stack, it has like a different platform item. So here's Ron Paul, the man of faith. Here's Ron Paul, protect gun rights. Here's Ron Paul, standing up for homeschooling. Ron Paul, lower taxes. Ron Paul on doctor stuff. I don't know. I think I'm going to read all this in another Ramble video and talk about Ron Paul, the pro-life champion. Ron Paul protecting marriage. Now, the one that stood out as something that actually, it looks like the entire Occupy movement summarized, is Ron Paul and the Fed. And this one I didn't have a lot of problem with, but I'm going to read those in another Ramble video and let everyone know exactly where I stand with him and all the other candidates. I might just throw all of them together, because I'll be at Mitt Romney's thing on Saturday filming that. And so I can just take all their flyers and what they're saying in their flyers. I have some Santorum flyers too. Not as many as I have for Ron Paul, but yeah. By and large, what I feel when I go to any Republican candidates' speeches is that there is a huge disconnect between those who believe in God and those who do not, and how those who believe in God just cater towards those other believers. Like at the back of this Ron Paul thing right here that says Christian statesman. Being a Christian is actually something he is selling, as part of his platform. I mean, this one right here, Ron Paul, a man of faith, and then I think that's just to counter people like Santorum, who basically have the entire evangelical vote wrapped up because they think, well, that's the only candidate for me because he's the most Jesus-y. So, yeah, the way that they're selling their Christianity to Christians in my presence as a non-believer is very alienating, and that's all of them, And I think that some of the decisions that I come to as far as where I am at odds with them. I think it really does boil down to religious faith, because I don't have the same burdens of appeasing a god with my decisions. I don't have to think about, well, is this something that relates back to some Christian law? I can just look at things as they are right now today, not as they were, culturally 2,000 years ago and then written down in a book. And really, I will summarize what I'm feeling right now in uh, in the Republican primary. To me, a lot of people seem to think that Ron Paul is the joke of the four that are left. I would say Newt Gingrich is the joke of the four that are left, even though I've made plenty of Santorum jokes in the past 2 days, um, uh, based on the Google definition. But to me, it seems like uh, Romney is very close to Obama anyway. Um, Ron Paul is so different that if he were to win the the Republican nomination, you would actually have a very different choice to make between him and Obama. Um, if Mitt Romney was running against Obama, it would basically be, do you want the same president, only switch their parties? You know, I'm sure he'd like people to think that there's a whole hell of a lot different between them, but I've seen Ron Paul and Rick Santorum describing Romney Care versus Obamacare, and yeah, they are very fucking similar. Um, he hasn't done enough, in my eyes, to differentiate how he would be different from just 4 more years of Obama. But I guess changing the little symbol from a donkey to an elephant would be important to a lot of Republicans. Um, so yeah, that's what I'm thinking right now. Is I was actually very happy that Rick Perry and Michelle Bachmann both dropped out of the race, and it's because they were evangelical dominionists. And the more I heard Rick Santorum talk and say that it all goes back to God, and when they say endowed by their creator, and then they follow it up with, of course that means God, and they keep on going on that spiel. It's like, wow, I've heard this before, argued it before, won the argument before, but you can win an argument on a logical level, and pwn someone on that issue of whether or not America is a Christian nation, or you know but if you don't win the hearts and minds, if you don't have people agree with you, then did you really win the argument? Because standing in that room where Rick Santorum was spewing this bullshit about how we need to be less secular and bring more God back into America, I really felt like, wow, I'm in a room full of people who believe this shit, and I am by far in the minority. So yeah, I just like how I felt about Bachman and Perry. I really want Santorum out of this race. But of the other three candidates, I don't really hold anything against them as much as I do the Christian Dominionists, two of which are already out, and I am so happy about that. I do think that in much the same way as some people probably did vote for Obama just because he was black. I'm not saying that a lot of people did that, but at least some did. I think people might vote for Romney because he is Mormon. And me as an atheist, I think that would be actually progress in much the same way as Obama being elected to president paves the way for an Asian or Latino president, even though he's not Asian or Latino. If a Mormon gets elected to the presidency, then it would be that much easier for an atheist to get there. So there's that. Yeah, that's all the thoughts I have for this right now. So next Ramble video, I will collect all the Santorum, Ron Paul, and Mitt Romney flyers that I've collected, read them, and tell you what I think about what they say. And hopefully I will also get some Newt Gingrich stuff, but he, as of this filming right now, has not made any plans to come to Colorado, and we're right about to have a blizzard right before our caucus, so maybe there's no way for him to get here because Denver International Airport just canceled like hundreds of flights. So I don't know. He is just in Nevada, and he probably could drive. I don't know, or have like a driver drive him while he's sleeping. That would work. I could make that trip, even in the snow. He's campaigning. He should, you know, just suck it up and sleep on the back seat. That's what I think he should do, so I can get some footage of him. He owes the people of Colorado a visit, at least a showing. All right, guys. Talk to you later.